Hey, magical experimenters, Taylor Elwood here, and I hope you guys are having a happy holiday season and celebrating whatever holidays it is that you celebrate. And for me, for the most part, I'm taking a break from things. I've been, doing a little bit of fiction writing for fun, but other than that, I'm not really doing like any hardcore work. I'm just catching up on reading and doing other fun stuff. But I thought today that I would do a video on the topic of compassion and magic because I was asked by a good friend of mine, Frater Barabbas, what the role of compassion is in my magical work. And I thought it was an interesting question to ask because really, when you think about the practice of magic, the word compassion isn't typically associated with it. And let's just be honest here. I mean, compassion is not typically associated with magic because I mean, let's look at what we're dealing with. We're usually dealing with either magic where we're focused on getting practical results in our lives to transform our lives, to solve problems, to better ourselves in some form or manner. Or perhaps we're doing some internal work or we're doing some divine communion with the spirits. But where does compassion fit into that? You don't typically see that in Western magical work. Where you find compassion is perhaps like in Buddhist meditation or Taoist meditation, and practices that are a little more focused and oriented around that. So for me, when he asked me that question, I had to reflect on it. Well, I mean, I do Taoist meditation, and I have experience with Daochen and Buddhist meditation practices. So certainly, in terms of doing internal work, I have some awareness around that. But when I got to thinking, like, where does compassion show up in my magical approach? It was like, well, where does it show up? So to answer that question, I think it's really important to recognize a few things. First of all, in my case at least, I am somebody where the practice of my magical work is very much based around my own interests. I mean, I'm experimenting with magic. I'm exploring, what can be done with magic. A lot of my focus is on the latest experiments that I'm working on and where I want to take magic to. I think that, that's motivated more by an insatiable curiosity and a desire to know what can be done with magic, albeit with an awareness that, like, the stuff that I write about and share with people ultimately is really designed from a standpoint of I want to help people on their spiritual journey. Like, for example, when I wrote The Inner Alchemy of Life, where I was talking about my work with the neurotransmitters and microbiota, I mean, I did that work because I wanted to know, like, if it was possible to work with the bacteria of your body, with the neurotransmitters and hormones and all those other things that are part of our bodies. It wasn't done from a sense of compassion or anything, albeit, I when I came away from there, I'm like, huh, this is something that people could use to improve their lives. I shared it, because I wanted to definitely, I definitely hope that it helps people improve their lives in a meaningful way. So, then I got to thinking, okay, if it's not showing up in my magical experimentation, where else could it be showing up? Well, I mean, I would say that one of the areas that compassion shows up for me is that, I definitely think that it's important to have an awareness of our place in the world and the impact that we have on our world. So for me, some of the stuff that I do, and it's not necessarily magical, some of it's more mundane than anything else, is that I try to focus on causes that are important and relevant to me that I think that at the same time support, some aspect of life on this planet and really speak to the fact that I think that, we're not above the planet, we're not above the other forms of life that are on this planet. We're part of that community. And I think a lot of times, as magicians, we end up missing out on that in some ways. I think people end up really kind of getting caught up in their own press release as magicians in some ways. Like, people are like, okay, I'm going to manifest this, I'm going to manifest that, I'm going to go and get this result, I'm going to do this and that. And I think that's great that, we can do that, but I think sometimes it's really important to remember that we're not above everything, we're really part of everything, and that what we do occurs in an environment that has an impact, that we may not always be fully cognizant of. So it's really important to be aware of that and to try and support those causes in a way that speak to you and remind you at the same time that you are part of life. But I think that where compassion really shows up is through in my work is through the internal work that I do and through my own awareness of my fallibility. If you've watched enough of these videos by now, you know that I am fairly transparent about myself and about my mistakes as well as my successes. I'm that way purposely because I think that if you're gonna practice magic and you're gonna talk about it, you should talk about the areas where you make mistakes as much as the successes. And I wish more people did that because I think it would be helpful to see, like, okay, so and so who presents themselves as an authority or whatever isn't perfect, because no one's perfect. We do make mistakes. But I think that because I do that and because of the internal work that I continually do, it's made me be more compassionate and aware of people than I used to be. I mean, I can definitely say that in my 20s and in a good portion of my 30s, I was not as compassionate as I could have been. Sometimes I could be downright judgmental toward people. And in my later 30s and in my 40s now, I've that's been tempered. And part of that's because I've made enough mistakes on my own that I can kind of look and see where somebody is making a mistake or where things are happening in their lives and be a lot less judgmental because I'm like, I've been there, or I can relate to that. Or I can be like, I wouldn't want to be in that situation. And so I feel for that person as they're struggling and doing the best they can. And I don't think at the same time that, it should give us carte blanche to just kind of excuse things. I mean, when someone is doing something and they're clearly going in the wrong direction, we have to be willing to call it out, but do it in a manner that's constructive and actually helps the person. And again, I say this as somebody who has sometimes needed that call out and has been called out sometimes for things that I've done or not done, as the case may be. But that's again why I don't present myself as perfect by any means, and really try to keep things very honest and open and real. Because the thing is like you're gonna make mistakes in life. You're gonna screw up. You're gonna do things that you're gonna look back on and wince and say, "Man, I wish I hadn't done it that way," or "I wish I had approached things differently." And so I think one of the lessons I can teach you is to be more compassionate and understanding toward other people, not to excuse what they've done, but to be understanding of them and be like, I can relate to what you're going through. I think you could have done it differently if they want the feedback, or just be like, look, I think you could have done it. You could have handled this differently, but I get where you're coming from and why things went the way they did. And I think we need to be willing to show that level of understanding to people around us. One thing that's really stood out to me over the last couple of years is how, in a very real sense, people have become more and more siloed, um, and have basically kind of fallen into echo chambers around their political causes and beliefs, their spiritual practices, and things like that. And I get it. I mean, there's certain things that I definitely wouldn't tolerate or agree with because I think that they're wrong. But at the same time, I also try to really look at where people are in their lives and at the fact that and I hold on to perhaps a naive hope that people can change, that people can become more aware of things. If only because I mean, when I look back on who I was sometimes somebody who was definitely like going down the wrong path, making the wrong choice, saying some stupid stuff. And then later on, I came to an awareness and I'm like, oh, wow, I really stuck my foot in it, or I really did this or I did that. And I mean, and that's even and that's not something where I can even say, like, oh, like that's long ago. I mean, I've done some stupid stuff even recently. because people do mistakes. Living your life is not, there's no guaranteed path toward you're going to get it right all the time. People are going to make mistakes. They're going to do stupid things. They're going to say things and do things that they regret. And if they're fortunate, they'll be able to rectify it with the people involved. And I think that that's where compassion needs to show up in our lives and in our spiritual work. And I guess there's another direction I would say that my compassion shows up in my spiritual work, and that is in my work with the spirits. Like I'm doing, like when I'm working with the archangels, and I'm working with them. And one of the things that's coming through is that it's not just work being done for the benefit of myself. It's work where they're like, yeah, we'll help you out in some ways, but we want you to do X, Y, and Z. I remember once I shared that with somebody, and she said to me, "Well, that's not the way the angels work with me. Like if I ask them to do stuff, they just do stuff. They don't expect anything from me." And I thought, that's interesting because that's never been my experience with spirits. And I think that such a one-way approach kind of creates a problem ultimately, because it's an unbalance. Whereas I feel like in my case with the archangels, sure, have they blessed me in certain ways? They certainly have, but there's also been some pretty heavy expectations. Like there's been like, hey, we want you to put out this kind of material, or we want you to work on these things, or we want you to support these causes. And it's not always even like saying, like showing up and being like publicly like, hey, I Taylor Eld, I'm doing this. It's sometimes it's very quiet, and I'm not gonna go into all of that because again, it doesn't necessarily need to be known. It's just a matter of simply doing the right thing for the right reasons. And I think that's true too, like when you work with any kind of spirit. uh, you know Unfortunately, in occultism, we see this thing, I think, where like people are kind of just focused on take, like, I want the spirits to do this, or I want to get these results, and so they're just taking and taking and taking and taking. And to me, a sense of compassion in spiritual work and magical work is really kind of a balance between give and take. It's like, what can I give, as well as what do I need to take sometimes? Because there's nothing wrong with needing to take something, with needing something. I mean, sometimes we do, and we have to recognize that as well, and recognize that it can be a good thing. But we also have to recognize, like, when can I give? What can I give to? What can I support? What can I do to make this world a better place than it was, before I came along? And and again, I get it that like in a lot of contemporary Western occultism, that's not a thought that's pretty prevalent at this point in time, at least from what I've observed. I mean, maybe I'm being a little harsh here on that, but I just don't see it in what people talk about or write about in most of the books out there. And I haven't always spoken this way, so I'm not pointing the finger at other people and not saying, I'm pointing it at myself too. Like I haven't not it's not like I was always this compassionate person, and I don't even know if most people would even think of me as being compassionate per se. Probably not. But that's okay. I'm not here for people's judgment or whatever. I'm just sharing some thoughts on where compassion comes into play. But I think that, like if you can come away with a better understanding of yourself and the world, and then you start to look at other people and you put yourself in their shoes, and then you start to go beyond people and you start to look at the world in general and at animals and plants and other forms of life, and you start to look at things differently. It changes the way you operate in the world, because you're not just focused on yourself and on getting something for you. And I think that, like, when it's understandable that sometimes you have to be that way. Like if you have a pressing problem in your life, or you're trying to manifest a certain level of stability in your life, and you think, practical man can help me get some results that bring some stability. I get it. Like we have to take care of our basic needs. That's just the truth. But at a certain point, once you've had those basic needs met, you kind of have to ask yourself, well, what's next? Where do I go from here? How do I, why am I really here? What is my purpose? Is it just to accumulate more things? Is it just to be materialistic? Is it just to, whatever? Or does it, or do you do you look beyond that? And I think that that's what's lacking in a lot of Western occultism. You have this focus on material gain or on spiritual gain, but not necessarily a question of, well, how do I give back, or when do I give back, or where do I start showing up in a different way? And again, I'm not going to say I'm some type of saint. I've made enough mistakes in my life, and I'm not. I mean, it's not like I go out there and do magic for people. In fact, I actually have a pretty hardcore rule against doing that, because one of the things I've come to recognize about myself is that unless I'm emotionally invested in that person, I'm not going to do magic for them, because I'm not going to care enough. But that's where then I kind of look and I say, okay, well, how do I give back to the world then? I can give back through writing books and creating classes, but I am legitimately charging for those things in order to earn a living. So, am I really giving at that point? You know, that's up to debate a bit in some ways. I mean, I could say I'm giving value that hopefully exceeds, the amount of money paid for. That's certainly the goal, but that even in and of itself does not necessarily make what I do giving. Now I could say, well, I write articles and I create videos like this where I don't charge anything, and that's certainly giving something, and that's true. There's some truth to that. I'm certainly giving something, to the community by choosing to write those articles and make these videos and not charging anything for them. So I think that's a good thing. But then but then I look beyond that and I say, but then, like, how do you really give back to the world in general, and how do you give back to people? And so for me, sometimes my choice to give to somebody is choosing to be compassionate. It's choosing to see the person beyond their actions, and being able to see, like, maybe the pain that they're in, or seeing that, they're doing something because they don't know better, and being able to provide some advice and guidance, being able to show up and say something or be present with them in a way. Like, I had a person who was telling me, like, recently, like, how, sometimes with his magical work, he goes back to doing things a certain way, and then he changes it, and this and that. Not that he was going in any one direction wrong or anything like that, but for me, showing up for him was just kind of like validating where he was at and saying, like, this is a normal part of things. For another person, it was valid. It was saying, it is valid and important to take a break. And here's what happens when you don't take a break. Here's my experience, because I've definitely been that workaholic. But it could also be like, I'm going to show up into the world at large. I'm going to go and I'm going to pick up some litter, or I'm going to go and I'm going to support a charitable cause that I believe in, or I'm gonna go and I'm gonna try and make different lifestyle choices that are more responsible and healthier for me, but are also healthier by extension for the planet. And I'm gonna share that with people, because those things might help other people who are in need as well. So it's for me, compassion shows up in, like, looking at my actions overall and being able to, as best as possible, think through not just the immediate short-term benefit or long-term benefit to me, which, there's always going to be an element of self-interest. I just think that's true. I'm not being cynical when I say that. I mean, I've known it. I've met enough people. I've known enough people, and I certainly know myself well enough to know there's an element of self-interest in pretty much everything I see people do, myself included. And if you think that's a horrible thing, just be honest with yourself. Like, if you can really honestly say that you've done something completely selflessly, that there's been no benefit for you at all in any way, shape, or form, emotionally or mentally or in another way, then hey, more power to you. You're certainly a better person than I am. But I can't say that I'm that way. But I think that that's where that compassion aspect comes into play too, because then it's like, well, I can be aware of that and be like, okay, that's it's not a cynical thing. It's, if anything, it's an understanding thing. Like, I can understand that this person has these motivations, or they're doing this or they're doing that, and it's okay. And I'm not going to judge them for it. And I think really, like, that's what it really boils down to for me, is like, if we look at how compassion shows up in a spiritual practice, we have to be willing to look at, who we are, who we're becoming, where we were coming from, and be able to show compassion. be able to understand and show some level of understanding. I mean, I guess another way I'd put it is that for me, like, showing compassion is also involved sometimes being able to see, like, somebody that I might where somebody maybe did wrong by me, right? You know, they did something to try and harm me or whatever. Well, and remember that sometimes I've been that person, like I've done wrong by somebody or or what have you. But it's also kind of a question of, do I do I then do something about that? And I have multiple responses. I can go all out and try and attack that person. I can do something similar to whatever that person did, or I can look at it and be like, okay, I know what to do to handle this situation without it necessarily getting any worse and escalating, and maybe I can even turn it around. I can show compassion to this person, not idiot compassion, not be compassionate to the point where I'm going to let them walk all over me. No, we're not going to do that. But I can be compassionate to this person and recognize that wherever they're operating from might be from a place of hurt, or might be from a place in their lives where they're not even able to see where they're at. And instead of punishing them for it, instead of crucifying them for it, I can be like, okay, like, look, this was wrong and I don't care for it. And here are the consequences, but I also understand, and I'm gonna, protect my boundaries, but I can be understanding even so. And that's kind of where I'm at now, like with my life. And I think, it's where I'm gonna continue to go. Like, I've definitely not always been that person. Um, but I think, the benefit of life is that you get to grow and change. Some people will say that you can't change, that, like, leopards can't change their spots, or things like that. But I disagree with that notion. I think people can change. I think change is hard. And that's something else to remember if we want to show compassion to someone. Like, change is hard. There's no two ways about it, because when you're changing who and what you are necessarily having to come face to face with your inner demons. You're coming face to face with the things about yourself that you don't care for, or things like that. And this goes back to the previous video I did last week, where I was talking about the hardest aspect of magic is internal work, because it is, because you're facing yourself, you're facing who and what you are. And it's not always easy work. I mean, I wish I could tell you it was, but it's not, because who and what you are is subject to interpretation, but it's also subject to change, and we can change. We do not always have to be the person that people think of us. I say this as somebody who has sometimes been a downright nasty and unpleasant person, who has sometimes been manipulative, who has sometimes been, not a good person. I'm not saying that to be like, oh, woe is me. I mean, just that's just the truth. Sometimes I have not been a good person, but I've had the fortune of being able to change. I've had the fortune of being able to do the work I needed to do, and to forgive myself and to forgive other people and all these other things. And again, I'm not saying I'm a saint. I'm not. Sometimes I can still be a right bastard if I need to be. And sometimes there is a need for that. Like, it kind of goes back to this term, in Buddhism, idiot compassion. Like, you don't want to be compassionate to the point where you're an idiot. You have to recognize when and where to put your boundaries down, when and where to draw the line, when and where to do whatever you need to do. You don't want to be to the point where people take advantage of you. But I think that if you can recognize, like, okay, I know when to pull out, the right bastard and do what I have to do to take care of my own and take care of myself. And I also know when to be compassionate and cognizant of what someone's going through, and measure my response accordingly. And I also know that, like, how I want to show up in the world overall, that you can make better choices. And you don't have to operate from a place of just being an utter bastard, or being an idiot, or whatever else. You can actually make choices that are healthy choices for you, that are healthy choices for other people as well. Um, and you can show up in the world better than you would otherwise. And that's kind of where I look at compassion and its role in magic, because I don't think, we talk about this enough, and I think it should be spoken more to, which is why I'm doing this video. But I also think, like, we have to really examine it from a place of careful awareness and recognition. Like, how do I really show up? What does that mean? And I know for myself, I'm operating from a place where I really just want as little drama in my life as possible. And by drama, I mean, public fights with people, or things like that. Like, I've had enough of that for my life. I did most of that in my 20s, and some in my 30s, and really not too much nowadays, and that's a good thing, and hopefully even less so as time goes on, because it's just kind of silly at a certain point. And sometimes I'll admit, I kind of shake my head when I see people, like, on Facebook or wherever, get into, these dramas with each other. And maybe that sounds judgmental. I think, if anything, social media just makes it more obvious that it's happening. But we all do it at one time or another. So, again, I think it's just kind of like, you be aware of that, and you don't, then you ask yourself, like, do I want to continue to show up this way? Is this who I want to be in my life? Who do I want to be? And sometimes who you want to be is that you just want to be that person doing your own thing. I mean, that's me. Is I want to be, I'm my own person doing my own thing, writing my books, I'm creating my classes, I'm working on the stuff that calls to me and brings me joy and purpose, and that's what matters at this point in my life, and what I suspect will matter for the rest of my life, because that's what I'm really feeling compelled to focus on. So I put that out there to you. You know, where does compassion show in your life? How do you show up? What matters to you? And then, what is your joy and purpose? Those are the things that are important to consider. All right, so that's it. You guys have stuck with me through all of this. I've watched. There's been like a few of you. Thank you. You guys are kind and wonderful. I appreciate it. And if you're not subscribed, click the little subscribe button down there, and then click the little bell notification so you get notified, and all that good stuff. And otherwise, take care of yourselves, and have a wonderful holiday season.